All right. Well, I'm going to officially kick us off then. We are now at 11:05. And so, welcome to everyone on day three of the CWIT Summit Create a New Story. We're so happy to have everyone here. For those of you who are new today, my name is Elaine Chang, and I'm a board member at Charlottesville Women in Tech, or CWIT as we call it, which is a local organization that creates community for women and girls interested in or practicing a technology career. Our mission is to build relationships and network and provide resources and education and to support events like today. So on behalf of the CWIT organization, we love to welcome you to our day three. And we hope that today, as well as the previous days, are inspiration for wherever you are in your journey, and know that you can create a new story, and there's no better time than today. Even though it feels like this is a challenging environment, and it is, I hope that you've seen over the last couple of days, or we'll see today, that now is a good time. If you've been with us for the last couple of days, you know every day we have a theme, and today's theme is about building a stronger tech community. The way we build a strong tech community is one where everyone feels welcome, included, and there's room for all people, no matter your gender identity, your background, your ethnicity, your skin color, your sexual orientation, your country of birth, or any other dynamic. Technology firms will be better off when there is more diversity because it provides the right innovation and, importantly, the enough talent. Well, we're going to get started. So I am happy to introduce today's keynote, which is a Q&A with Kelly Palmer. As a former colleague and current friend, Kelly has taught me almost everything I ever learned about inclusion and equity and diversity at work. Thank you, Kelly. And today she's going to share her knowledge with you. Kelly is currently the head of Global Inclusion and Diversity and Corporate Citizenship for CFA Institute. She's a strategist and business leader with expertise in IDEA, or IDEA, inclusion, diversity, equity, and accountability, sustainability, philanthropy, people and systems management, and the performing arts. Her talent for developing strategy and translating it into action have allowed her to serve organizations ranging from institutions of higher education to leading membership organizations and nonprofit startups. In these spaces, she improves business processes and operations, builds policies and procedures, creates and oversees high talent and diverse teams, and aligns business goals with corporate citizenship opportunities. Kelly earned her PhD from the University of Virginia in higher education with a focus on social foundations for education. She's a scholar of diversity, and she published Faculty Service in Black and White, a quantitative study of the impact of faculty service on tenure attainment. And this was the first quantitative analysis of cultural taxation, a term first used by Amanda Padilla in 1994. She's co-authored Driving Change, Diversity, Inclusion, and Investment Management, a research-based practical guide for industry leaders. She earned her MA and ED in education at Wake Forest in counseling, and her BA from Elon University in elementary education. And we are so pleased to have you with us today, Kelly. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for the invitation. This is always fun to chat with you.
All right, so I'm going to start with just maybe hopefully something a little bit easy. Maybe you can tell all of us about your background. How did you get started? Where did you start? And then how did the road lead you to diversity and inclusion?
So interestingly, you can tell from where I went to school and what I studied that the path was not always leading to inclusion, diversity, equity, and accountability. I thought I was going to teach. And I loved being in the classroom. And I also learned pretty quickly that there were issues in the world that centered around injustice that were hard for me to address as a classroom teacher. So I got a master's in counseling, thinking that I would take that skill set to affect the lives of children, because when you affect the life of a child, you affect the lives of adults. And during that learning process, became keenly aware of the dynamics of the university environment. It's one thing to be a consumer in undergrad, and it's another thing to start to work in that space, which I did during my master's program. Became a mentee of a university president, really loved walking and learning from her.
Mhm.
And that was a game changer for me. It moved me from the littlest ones to the folks beginning their formal adult and professional lives in higher ed. Came to UVA, did a ton of work thinking that I would be on a senior leadership path for general administration of the university. Let's run the place. Let's make the books balance. Let's make sure people are in the classrooms, those sorts of things. But it didn't matter what class I was taking or what project I was working on. There was this constant theme of the marginalized person, the
Mhm.
person who wasn't represented in the space, the person who needed to be in the conversation because they were who the conversation was about.
Mhm.
Um, and I just have been uncontrollably attracted to it. That was 20 years ago that I came to UVA and started in the space here in Charlottesville. And when I came over to CFA Institute, I did a job that had nothing to do with underrepresented people, but it was still of such interest to me. And, you know, to shorten the longest story in history, that's how I ended up in this role, is that no matter what, I've been doing the work, even when the work wasn't a part of my job title. And in the last 18 months is the first time that my passion has become my avocation.
Mhm. It is an interesting story that I don't know, even though we've had so many conversations, that I knew the whole path, but it makes complete sense to me. And I think it is interesting that, sometimes doing that work is being in roles that aren't directly related because you do get the chance to impact so many people. So both sides of it is so interesting.
I
Well, in
think
your
that's even the more important work. I'll just chime in to say that it's not the people in my jobs and my roles in the chief diversity roles who have the greatest impact. It's the people sitting in other places making all those other decisions.
Well, I think it's a little both, because the folks like me who are sitting in those decisions need individuals that can help guide them. So it's a little bit of both. So
So
tell us all a little bit then about what you do in your role right now as the Chief Diversity Officer at CFA Institute. What does that involve?
absolutely. I think first and foremost, it involves providing a perspective to the organization. Um, a lot of decisions get made, and we care about the human resources perspective or the technology perspective, or there are all manner of takes. Legal's always in the room, and one of the things that I'm there for is to provide the perspective of equity
Mhm.
and disparate impact, and asking the questions about who's involved. Is it an inclusive process? Are we opening our eyes and our perspectives outwards so that we can make the best possible decision? And so
Mhm.
that manifests in a variety of ways. Certainly, we are looking at operational pieces of the organization. The most powerful tool you have in this work in a business are the policies and procedures, the structures that are in place. So I spend a lot of time there. Another important piece is educating people.
Mhm.
We have a variety of generations in the workplace right now. We've got folks who are trailing GI generation folks all the way to our Generation Z in the workplace, and so not everyone has had the same um, introduction into these topics. In fact, we know they haven't because the
Mhm.
landscape is changing every day. So a big part of the work is centering everybody around a current set of understandings.
Mhm.
Um, and then the third piece of the work that I'll highlight, because I think it is somewhat unique to CFA Institute, at least in the Charlottesville landscape, is that we're global. And so thinking about these issues beyond tiki torches on our lawn, you know,
Mhm.
there is a global narrative to this, and trying to understand that. which I do not espouse to be an expert. It's a constant learning process. But those are the three main pieces of what I'm thinking about or dabbling in any given day. You could bucket everything like
that. That seems like a good overview and foundation for us to sort of jump from. And probably leads me into my next question, which is, part of what you're doing is building this program. And many of us are in organizations where there maybe isn't a program. Probably most of us do not have a chief diversity officer, I will say. Interested in, what do you think makes a strong diversity, equity, inclusion program? What are the most critical elements, and what are things that, maybe are, I don't even know about nice to have, but, what are the really important elements of a program?
So I'll actually start with the piece that I don't lead, but that I partner with someone on at CFA, which is we have an external function that ties directly to our business. How are we carrying out our business in a way that's inclusive, and how are we educating the industry about these topics and supporting their growth? And I start there to answer this question because if your organization doesn't have this function, the best place to start is with that direct and clear connection to the business. Mm-hmm. We know that diversity of perspective allows us to increase revenues, that it creates more stable and sustainable businesses. I'm not talking about the trees in the earth. I'm talking about, will you be in your place relative to revenue multiple years from now? And so that's a compelling story for senior leaders. And I bet you have a perspective about that. I mean, when all of our work started, when you and I were working together several years ago, you were our executive sponsor. And our work, as has been the case with many organizations, was started and grounded in, if we're going to be great around the world, we need to be great about the world. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Not just us. So I think that's the first element of a program. And then the pieces around getting people ready. This is, we're not building a thing structurally. We don't need a bolt and a nut and a piece of wood and a this and that to make a thing in this work. What we need are a set of skills that allow us to ebb and flow with the way the world moves and changes over time. Mm-hmm. And so, educating people on inclusive leadership practices and skills by doing the ABCs of inclusion. And I'll actually show a little visual of that because it's one of my favorite things to think about. Well, I won't because it's too hard and it's disappeared. But the ABCs of inclusion are gain awareness, getting people aware that there are issues, that there's reason for us to want to be more inclusive, and that groups may have historically been marginalized or not included for various reasons. And then building skills. So building skills meaning, how do I leverage that difference once we have it, or how do I create space and conversations for people to contribute their truest thoughts about the work that we're doing? And then changing behaviors. On some of the deep end work relative to inclusion and diversity, it's hard stuff. We look at ourselves and our behaviors and what we've experienced over a lifetime, and we need to change. And changing yourself is a difficult thing. So I think about building all programmatic aspects that engage people and that help them grow through that ABCs of inclusion framework, that aware, build, and change. I will also say that if you've anchored to the business and you've got a strong learning component, the last thing I would say is trying to engage everyone, including the non-believers. Mm-hmm. And that's tough to do. And I'll just pause there because I'm sure that'll come back at some point.
Yeah, that's a good one. Sorry about the phone ringing in the back of my house. There, as I mentioned before, a lot of the folks on the phone here probably don't have a program in their organization. And I'm curious if you've got some advice for them. Think about Oh, look, there's the ABCs. All right, we'll stop there. I'll go back to my question in a minute. But this is great. I love the simplicity of the ABC. And the awareness to me feels like it is one of the harder parts in this journey, because it is hard to know, I think, as most of us feel, or at least I know in my experience, where I feel is that I don't always know. I'm not always aware of where, I need to make changes.
They're
And
called blind spots for a reason, right? It's because we can't see them. We don't even know what we don't know.
yeah, yeah. What's been so helpful to me on awareness is being open to when other people, are willing to tell me, hey, this is your blind spot. And trying to do my own education on it as well. But so when so for a lot of the individuals on the call today who maybe work at an organization or a company that does not have a program and doesn't have maybe the awareness or the focus on changing behaviors, what is your advice to them about how, if they want to help, maybe introduce this in their organization, or maybe start an effort, maybe from a ground roots perspective? Do you have any advice for them, how they might want to get started, or how to get started?
I mean, my first thought is just bring your persistence. So often, particularly we know this through data for women, that we get a no and we hold that no, and that no is firm for us. And so I would say, before you do anything, just know you may have to knock 10 times. Keep going. Eventually the door will open. The second piece is understand your locus of control. Uh, if you are interested in a thing, I can remember at a previous employer, they had no programs or structures in place, but I saw the other Black women and I saw them seeing me. And I thought, we're just gonna make a group. We're just gonna decide that once a month or every 2 months, we're gonna get together and have lunch together, so that we can help lift each other up and hold each other up. Well, that concept is the essence of an employee resource group or a business resource group. And once your group gathers, whatever that group is, if it's the women in technology group, for those who are Charlottesville based, if you haven't looked, Willow Tree has the most delightful names for their business resource groups. The Trees Without Degrees has to be my favorite naming convention of a business resource group ever. But it's this idea of getting folks together, because you can do that, right? That doesn't have to be organization sanctioned. And then once you get together, speaking with one voice. When you can do that, people start to listen. When you can weigh in as kind of a voting block, as it were, to make things central to what we're all thinking about right now, counts and recounts and counting again. Um, that's a way to get involved in an organized, structured I&D programmatic sense. But then there's also shifting from that to just who you are within yourself. When you are making decisions, particularly around hiring or building a team, asking yourself a few simple questions. What are we trying to accomplish? Who are we trying to impact? And is that who in this space? When you're having a discussion and you feel like maybe in a staff meeting that you've reached a conclusion about a thing, the topic came up, you discussed it, you feel good, stopping for a second to say, what are we not thinking about? Who's not here? Who haven't we consulted with yet? If you can just pace the activity and pause, even when you don't know what you don't know, sometimes just throwing it out into the room enables someone who has perhaps a broader perspective to say, ooh, I think this has an element of. And that doesn't always end in woman, person of color, differential ability. It may end in we are the tech team and this has a finance element. it may end in something else. Inclusion is about so much more than the demographic elements. And each of us in every one of our decisions, but particularly in those people related decisions, have the power to affect it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that pause moment is so incredible. And I was reflecting in another session yesterday, I think, that as leaders sometimes, or just as professionals sometimes, you're so conditioned to get stuff done and make decisions and be fast about it, and no time to waste, right? You got to go, right? We're going at 100 miles an hour. That pause moment, though, if you could just remind yourself half the time to do it, makes a huge difference. And when I'm lucky enough and I catch myself, it is always worth it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a good one. So when we think about kind of all of the changes that, not really changes that we've seen, but the events that we've seen this summer and in the fall, and kind of all of the social justice, finally kind of getting its day, and hopefully to stay. What has changed, do you think, for programs or efforts around diversity and inclusion and equity in companies? Like, what do you see in terms of those changes, and what's your observation about what's been happening and the impact on companies?
Gosh, walking back to George Floyd, then Breonna Taylor, and then all of these subsequent losses of life. It was a harrowing moment, I think, for the soul of our nation, for all of us to be at home and to witness the violation of a fundamental thing that we know to be foundational, which is, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, the right to a jury of your peers, the rights that someone has when they are, even when they are suspected of the worst things. And the reaction from businesses was unlike it had ever been before. Businesses and business leaders responded with statements and by listening. And those are two seemingly simple but very revolutionary practices in the employment world. These statements were recognition of multiple things. One, that we are a part of a society that has evolved to the degree where there's an expectation of our businesses that they do some social good and that they do not violate the social contract, and that they uphold it. That upholding it, there's something different there. And then the listening within the organizations by leaders. This, I don't know all there is to know. There's something afoot. This thing has happened, and my Black or otherwise underrepresented racially employees have had one response, and maybe my other employees have had a slightly different response. Not to say that everyone wasn't taken aback, but there seemed to be a difference, and leaders were seeing it and paying attention to it and wanting to understand it. So I think if you think about that ABCs, it was an A moment for the collective, including business for once. It wasn't about neutrality. It was about, we better be active. And in fact, those statements snowballed. A couple of places had a statement like within hours. And then if your organization didn't have a statement within like 7 days, what planet were they living on? Well, now let's fast forward. Months have gone by, and employees and consumers and other stakeholders, including investors, are saying, you said you were going to do a thing. What you going to do? Where is it? Are you doing it? Have you done it? How's it going? When are you going to do it? And leaders are also saying, I said this thing because I meant this thing. And I want it to happen, but I don't know how to make it happen. So there's almost an inclusion, diversity, equity, and accountability renaissance afoot because people have gone out in public and said, we care and we want to change. And there's this acknowledgement of not inherently knowing how to change, because here's the secret: nobody's done it perfect yet. And they're seeking help and support. Yeah. So there is an interesting momentum because organizations are engaging in reading groups and dialogues and considering their codes of conduct. And leaders are taking the pause before they make big decisions because they want to reconcile with the public statements that they've made. It's an interesting and exciting time. And I study human behavior, right? So humans are not known for their consistency.
Yeah.
So we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. It is an interesting, but I think too, and I'll just remark, a little bit on my observation, and just in the organization that I work for, we didn't make a public statement to the world, but there was a statement internally, and I think it came from, in our CEO's place, a place of genuine, I don't want to say change of heart, but real, like, deep awareness of the impacts of what was happening. And I can't read into his thought process, but I think that is where I see perhaps the lasting change that maybe hopefully other companies are experiencing as well, so but yes, I'm with you. We will see. And it does take us, continuing to do the work that we're doing in the everyday, in the trenches, that will help, keep that momentum going. So hopefully.
Well, and you asked with your last question or the question before, what individuals can do if there's not a formal something. If your organization made a statement to its employees or externally, but there's not a structure, that's a wonderful thing to anchor from when you say, how can I help? How can I help us do this thing we said we would do? I think there's a lot of receptivity in this season.
Yeah, I think that too. And I think, to your point, be that change, be the person that steps up and say, I'm interested. And I think that goes also back to your whole being persistent, because I think, you're going to eventually catch someone who's in that moment and is receptive. And it might not have been the day yesterday, but it might be today. And you never know. And also, leaders change. There's new leadership. If you've got a new leader, go ask that one. Because,
that's right.
We've had a lot of leadership change at Chantel in a very positive way, and that has been the shift. And I think it's definitely bringing on the some of the renaissance that we're seeing in a lot of ways, but in this one in particular. So I do think continuing to ask and in different ways and different people, and is a good one too.
And make no assumptions. The very person you think isn't team diversity may be the very person who would hold the banner the highest, the farthest, and with the greatest energy.
I think that is such a wonderful point, because we may look at some of our, maybe traditionally, white male colleagues, I'll just say, and think, oh, there's no way, and they are 1,000% behind it.
Yes.
So excited, and have gotten it maybe better than many of us for whatever, from their own experiences or education, or it's our own bias, right? And I think we have to be as careful of that bias as everyone, all the other biases. It's such a good thing.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. What do you find? This is my last question before I open it up for everyone else. What do you find is still the hardest part of this work, and the part that you're really like, I don't know how we're getting over this hill?
Well, when you say of the work, I think immediately of my role in the work,
Mhm.
being the position to be the face and voice and responsible party for this work for an organization. The hardest part for me is always when someone feels threatened by or uncomfortable about the work, receiving a personal attack.
Mm,
um, it is challenging to take the incoming, um, to have just a moment of truth about it.
mm,
I walk the earth in this body to begin with, and then to find myself in a position where I am paid to and therefore must to some degree receive the incoming from
mm,
individuals that is not as much about what we're working on in the way that they articulate it, but very deeply and personally about me.
mm,
Um, that's tough and resets me sometimes and allows me to take a deep breath, think from someone else's perspective, usually not in the moment, and come back. Um, More broadly, for all of us, for the collective, I do think that the ongoing challenge is the attention deficit that occurs across humanity.
mm,
We are just shiny object oriented.
I imagine
And
more and more every day.
there are many, many important things. And so I don't say this as a negative challenge to humans. I think part of our strength is seeing a thing and zestfully going after it. And that means that if you're giving something attention, you're taking it from other places.
Mm,
And in this moment, this topic's the shiny thing. We've not been the shiny thing for a very long time. We are the shiny thing. And so once you've achieved that positioning, there's an ever present sense that, and we will not be soon. So what do we do
Yeah, I think yeah, that's how do you make the most of this moment so
then?
that some of it sustains when there's another shiny, because you
Yeah,
want to be able to create at least, some layer of sustainability, So I do think taking that shot, making that, moment. I know in our organization, the chief human resources officer and I are taking advantage of this moment
yeah. Hmm.
and, making the most of it for long term sustainability, even when we know, there'll be some distractions. So
Yes.
really get that.
Create the committees, set the practices and standards, make the adjustments. Start demanding that you send applicant pools back when they don't have some variety to them, and all the other things that you can institute now that can continue. An object in motion
Yeah,
tends to stay in motion. Let's get some things in motion.
that's right. Yes, I love that physics principle. Okay, well, I'm gonna let the group ask some questions of you, Kelly, before I wrap us up with my final question. So, do we have some questions from the audience? You guys can put it in chat, or you can request to come up on stage with Kelly and I. So, anyone interested in a question? I I do have a sort of last question for you, so I'll ask it now
Yeah.
as we're
Okay.
letting people think a little bit about their questions. So I know that you are an avid reader, and I know that the books behind you are not a fake depiction of what you could be reading. I know you're an avid reader. Tell me what you're reading now.
Okay. Gosh, I am personally on top of some historic reading in this space because I've done so much current reading over the last probably 10 months, I just focused in and erased everything else from my Audible lineup and went all in on inclusion and diversity.
Yeah.
So I'm going backwards a little bit and spending time in spaces that I didn't attend to when I wasn't in school. So I've got Whistling Vivaldi, which is about stereotyping. That is currently playing on my Audible. I am very much looking forward to a couple of new releases, but I'll tell you a couple of things that are a few books that have stuck out in the last few months that I'm loving and
Yeah.
that I would recommend to just anyone. One is Overcoming Bias by Tiffany Jana and Matthew Freeman. If you're thinking about these topics and you want to first begin with the basics of a little perspective and gaining some vocabulary. It's an easy read. There are 9 activities. You would think an activity book for grown-ups? Yes, there are 9 activities and they are rather enlightening and rather easy. So I like that. The next book that I'm planning to roll out to my organization because I was so impressed, and it's a new publication, is Subtle Acts of Exclusion. And
Oh, yeah.
so Subtle Acts of Exclusion is also a Tiffany Jana book. And by the way, for those in Virginia, Tiffany is based in Richmond with TMI Consulting. So also proximate, but I don't care where we are in the world. The way these books are written, they're very accessible. That Subtle Acts of Exclusion is a different way of saying microaggression. And they're purposeful in their changing of the language because microaggressions, imagine being hit with a pebble and then imagine being hit with a million pebbles. One pebble may not hurt, but a million will take it down. And so there's nothing micro about that. And the book talks to you about what do you do if you receive one, if you witness one, or if you perpetrate one. And so a lot of practical stuff there. If you want to jump into the deep end of the ocean, White Fragility has a special place in my heart, particularly chapter 11. It's a tough read. It's not your first read. It is Robin DiAngelo is a white woman who's an American, and she, I think, gives the gift of saying how behaviors are perceived and how they have tracked over time in a way that is very much holding up a mirror. That's not where you start, it's where you end if you're tuning up. And then behind me, right here, is Caste. And Caste is a tome of a read, and it is amazing. It likens our culture to the caste system in India. And it walks through the history of what has happened in this landscape in a way that is very educational for the reader. If you are like most of us, the vast majority of Americans went to public school to be educated, and their curriculum didn't include the history of all of us. And so if you want to get it, and you want to get it vividly with the true high points as I would see them, Caste is a great read. So a few things on my list. I could probably give you about 100 more, but thank you for letting me indulge my literary love.
Thank you. Those are all books that I too, one or two I've read, and a couple of them that I have on my list. So yeah, for sure. Well, except for Cats, that one, just the size of it is intimidating me right now. But I've heard Dr. Jana, and she is amazing. Oh my gosh.
And has a great TED Talk, by the way, everyone, that's readily available. So go listen to the TED Talk.
Yeah, she spoke at RVA Tech too earlier in the year, and I think that's probably online somewhere. But she is fantastic. And we talk about her book on acts of exclusion quite a bit internally. So those are good ones. We did have one question. I'm going to ask this one, and then we'll try to wrap us up on time here. So there was a question about How can individuals encourage their own firms to hire for more diversity in the workplace? Any tips for the team?
So I'm going to start with a book because see now my brain is there, but I promise that it's easier than just a book. There is a book called Rebel Ideas,
Mm-hmm.
and Rebel Ideas is a wonderful positioning of why it just makes business sense. And Rebel Ideas has a series of images in it that I love so much that I've taken them out to be redesigned because they're rather boring in the book. But it talks through how if this box that I'm in on this screen is the sum total of useful information in solving a problem, this little circle right here could be one brilliant person and they could probably solve a problem. But if the problem is complex, you need greater coverage. And when you hire, like you, say from the same university or the same topical programs or the same social background, there's overlap and you create a team of clones. But when you hire from different universities in different topic sets with different experiences, you start to get the coverage of the box.
Right.
And anybody who's running a business wants the broader perspective so that they can keep and gain market share so that they can establish a greater pattern for revenue.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm talking about, anchoring to the business first.
Yep.
And so, I'm not above earmarking a page of a book and leaving a book on the desk of someone. I know we're not in offices anymore, but Amazon also delivers to everyone's door. But try New Dominion, they're local, or any other local provider. But the point being that if you can let them know that when everyone agrees, there's probably a problem.
Yeah.
When you start a conversation with unanimity, something's not okay. And if those things are happening in your organization, I think there's a case to be made for that rebel idea. And it doesn't beat you up with all of the what some people still consider deeply diversity lingo of the kumbaya. They use an example of climbing Mount Everest and why everybody died on a particular mission. And they walk through it by analyzing this overlapping set of ideas and how limited they were when they didn't have broader coverage. So I'd meet your leader where they are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know that singularity of ideas is terrific when you are running a production line, and the same thing has to be created every time. Then it's more efficient because everybody's thinking the same way, and you understand it and you get it out. But if you have anything complex, and there isn't a business today that doesn't have complexity, then you can't have singularity of thought, which is exactly what you're saying.
And if that assembly line wants to iterate, if they want to be on top of the next great thing that needs to be made in mass consistently, innovation is born out of diversity.
Yeah, it is.
And own the truth of it too, that it's harder, that it takes longer. But you know what? You usually don't have to go back again and start over.
Yeah, I like that point too. And I often make that myself, that you're doing it if it's hard. It's going to feel hard. Like you just need to have that framework that this is going to be hard. It's not going to be easy, but the outcomes will be better. Yeah. Well, we have taken all your time here, Kelly, but I am sure I'm speaking for everyone in the audience that the time with you was well spent. And I always learn something, always take something away, and always just enjoy the conversation. And you help ground me. So I really, really appreciate your time here today. Thank you so much. I know I'm probably people are saying that in the chat too. But thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for CWIT for doing what you're doing, which is exactly the model. It's getting together, lifting each other up, educating each other across the board, and then catapulting each other forward. we need more of this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We feel that way, but we also want to broaden the tent. So we're hoping to do that too.
Awesome.
So thanks everyone for participating in the keynote this